Born in Cleveland, raised a hillbilly. What's your story? Welcome to the Hillbilly Justice on the School Bus podcast. Here's your host, Sarah Blossom Ware.
Welcome to the second episode of the Hillbilly Justice on the School Bus podcast. I'm Sarah Blossom Ware. The purpose of this podcast is to spark discussions in the student body and the general community regarding diversity and acceptance, and to break stereotypes. Today I'll be reading Chapter 2 from my memoir about growing up as a hillbilly in Northwest Arkansas. Chapter 2 is called The Back 40. We pulled into Fayetteville, Arkansas, without a plan in the world for where we would stay. As we wound around Highway 71B, my parents spotted a quaint little hillside trailer park advertising places for rent. Dad stopped to inquire at the caretaker's house, which George and I later called the man's house. My dad can be quite the talker, and he was gone for some time, but when he came back, he was wielding keys to our new, used trailer rental. There's certainly no shortage of characters in this world, and it turned out that the man at the man's house was a cartoonist who specialized in Woody Woodpecker. Fayetteville was nothing like Cleveland, except that it was also a city. George and I loved living by the man's house. It was located very near a Baskin-Robbins, with its 31 scrumptious flavors of ice cream. It was also near Wilson Park, which had 2 playgrounds and a swimming pool. I guess these conveniences were too much for Mom and Dad, because we only stayed by the man's house for about a month. Then my dad came home one day and announced that he had just bought the most perfect tract of land. We moved onto 40 acres of wooded land on top of Hoot Owl Mountain, literally the back 40. Never mind that there was no electricity there, or plumbing, or house. No problem. We lived in a huge army tent for several months while my parents built a cabin with the help of our neighbors, the Emersons, who lived several miles away. Mr. Emerson taught Dad how to use a chainsaw to cut down trees. Since there was no electricity, the entire cabin was built using chainsaws, handsaws, hammers, and nails. After the log frame was assembled, Dad nailed solid sheets of wood paneling all around the 4 sides of the house. Then he drew a rectangle and some squares, and used his chainsaw to cut out holes to create the door and some windows. The imagery that comes to my mind is that this is exactly the way that Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote would build their cabins. No, this was not a white oak lodge cabin. This was a back 40 cabin. But it was fancy because it had 2 stories. The bottom story was one large open room that served as the kitchen/dining room/living room, and the top story was a large open sleeping loft. My brother Henry was born during the cabin years, and his crib was a dresser drawer that was set on the floor in the loft. The carpet on the ground floor was actually artificial turf, the green plastic stuff. It was quite a step up from the tent. I did not mention where the bathroom was in the cabin. That's because there wasn't one. But there was a front porch. On summer nights, I would read books by Coleman Lantern Light. When I was about 6 years old, my grandparents gave me the wonderful gift of the entire Little House on the Prairie book series. I loved reading about the adventures of young Laura Ingalls. I didn't realize until many years later that I wasn't supposed to be able to relate to her life so well. And so I found myself ultimately plucked out of Cleveland, one of the most populated cities in the U.S., and set down in the middle of nowhere. My youth was lived out in Cove Creek Community, just south of Hogeye and northeast of Bug Scuffle, not far from Devil's Den. Okay, so let's reintroduce our discussion panel members that are joining us for the first 4 podcasts. I've asked each member to come up with a 6-word summary of who they are. You can also hear more expanded introductions in the first podcast. I'll start. I'm Sarah Blossom Ware, and my 6-word summary is born in Cleveland, raised a hillbilly.
Hi, I'm Gina Chambers, and my 6-word summary is extremely vivid dreams all night long.
Hello, I'm Andrea Shaw, and my 6-word summary is Island Girl Stuck in the City.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Wojcik, and my 6-word summary is pre-physical therapy student and Polish folk dancer.
Hi, I'm Jaimie Finlayson. My 6-word summary is I'm a fun-loving free spirit.
If you're listening in, please leave your 6-word summary in the comments online. Before we move on to the discussion questions for this week, it's time for a segment I call, So What Have You Been Busy With Lately? So, Andrea, what have you been busy with lately?
I have been busy with a lot. I homeschool our 4 children, and my husband is currently running for Elgin City Council, and that just consumes our life, not even counting in the day-to-day, his regular job, feeding everybody, attending our church, and being involved with that. So we are very, very, very busy lately.
Okay, so now for the fun part, discussion section. So the first question that we have to discuss today is, what are some of your first memories as a child? So some of my first memories as a child were waving out the screen door, the glass door at my grandparents when my parents first went on their vacation to Arkansas. And then, most of my first memories are actually when we moved to Arkansas. That's when I started getting a lot of my first memories. So Gina, I'm wondering, what are some of your first childhood memories?
So because my parents separated and divorced at such a young age, I don't have any memories of them together. My first memories would be around 2 or 3, them separate. One with my father, when my mother left and moved to Florida, I was still in Michigan with him. I remember playing Barbie dolls behind like a chair in the living room. And then one with my mother after she came back and got me. We were living in a hotel room next to a paper factory, and I remember the awful smell of the paper factory.
Hey, Andrea, what about you?
I remember recounting to my mom a dream that I had thought I had of being on, I don't remember what they're called. They're not like chair lifts, but they are boxes that go up a cable really high, like in Lake Tahoe. And no, not a ski lift. They're just for transporting people and looking.
Like cable cars?
Kind of,
like
yeah.
a monorail?
Kind of, but they hang. I don't know. Okay, I don't remember what they're called, but I remember looking over and just being so high up and kind of terrified. And my mom was like, "Oh, that wasn't a dream. That actually happened." But I think I was 3 when that happened, and we were in Lake Tahoe and on this thing. And so I thought that was an interesting memory in dream form, not.
Okay. Kathleen?
Okay, so I can't remember a specific memory as a child, but when I think back to my childhood, a lot of my memories come from just being outside a lot, either in the park, playing sports. I remember spending a lot of time with my mom. She's kind of a prominent figure in my life, learning how to ride a bike, things like that.
Okay. How about you, Jaimie?
Well, most of my very first memories are from when I was young, living, before my mom moved out to Big Rock. We were living in Naperville on Brainerd, right down the street from my elementary school. And I just remember being there and playing with all the kids outside all the time, playing Power Rangers and watching the lilac tree growing outside. We had a cherry tree in back, and I would climb that and pick the cherries right off the tree and eat them right there. Or playing in the snow on the hill and going sledding with everybody, playing with the mud, just doing all sorts of fun outdoor activities with all the neighbor kids.
So the same activities you do now?
Very close to the same activities. Don't judge my mud pie until you've tried it, okay?
Okay, great. So the second question that I have for discussion today is, did your parents value planning or spontaneity? So we pretty much know the answer to that for my parents. And really today still I'm very spontaneous. I'm not a big planner. But, how about your parents? Do they like to plan everything out, cross their T's, dot their I's, or were they very spontaneous? And then how did this affect your tendency to plan or be spontaneous?
So for me, I would say there was not much planning going on. I would say my mom to this day has a lot of impulse control issues. So she would move sporadically, change jobs sporadically. My father was much more mellow but I still don't know that there was a whole lot of goals or imagery for himself of the future. He sort of just lived day to day. It's caused trouble for me. I think now I struggle with just the career I want to make and raising the children and trying to plan much for the future. Financially, I think it was a struggle in early marriage, but I think working together and realizing that to some degree, I think goals and that form of planning can be very beneficial. But then also trying to still keep, who I've been created through my past, and the spontaneity, I think, is good too to some degree.
Andrea?
I think you tend to be who your parents are, and I don't remember them being one or the other, but if I look at myself, I like to be spontaneous, but I also like to plan things out. So I think that they were probably a little of both. Like, maybe not quite that fine line. I'm not sure which side they tended towards, but I think that they did both.
Jaimie?
Well, my parents are kind of complete polar opposites. My mom is very much the big planner. She knows exactly how she wants everything. She's got everything completely planned out till the day she dies, I'm sure. She has everything planned. My father, being on the opposite end of that, I don't think he knows what he's doing next week. He is very spontaneous and all over the board. For me, I feel like I have a good mix of both. I do love having a plan. I have a general idea for a 5-year plan. I love organization and knowing, exactly what's going to happen next. At the same time, I do like a level of spontaneity. Like to, when I was younger, I remember just getting in the car and we just go for drives. I'd end up in Indiana just driving around having a good time. I just get an idea in my head and it just happens. So I feel like I got a good mix of both.
Yeah, that's fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's fun. Kathleen?
So my parents are definitely very spontaneous. Similar to your dad, my dad has the same mentality that he doesn't plan weeks or months in advance. He kind of lives just day to day. My mom is both the same way. So when we were younger, we used to go on a lot of camping trips, and the camping trip would start with just the opening of a map and picking a random spot to go to and just traveling there. Same with road trips. We would travel out to the west or down to Florida kind of on random without having any prior planning in advance. Ironically enough, I am the complete opposite of my parents. I am very much a planner, and I like to plan everything out and kind of go by a set schedule.
Thank you very much. So the next question that we have up for discussion is about what the books you liked to read when you were growing up. The Laura Ingalls books, the Little House on the Prairie series, really sticks out in my memory. There's a whole series, and I read those books by Coleman Lantern Light out on the porch during the summer. So I'm just wondering what kind of books that you remember, and why did you like those kind of books, basically. Gina?
So my parents did not put much of an emphasis on reading, so I was not an avid reader, but when I did read, it was stuff that had to do with violence, like vampires or something to do with Stephen King. I think because I was overexposed as a child, as I got older, it took things that were less and less, I guess, sensitive to entertain me. So
I spent a lot of time reading. We didn't have electricity, and so that was my form of entertainment, was reading. So I read everything in the library that I possibly could, except for horror things. I'm the complete opposite there.
So that was your imagination time, or your
absolutely.
Your TV time was reading.
It was, yeah.
Kathleen?
So I was much in the same way. So I read a lot of books when I was younger. Usually I picked books that I could relate to. So when I was younger, kind of like the easier books, and then when I was growing up, more of like the Judy Blume, and then like Chicken Noodle Soup as like girls that age. But yeah, I definitely used it as a form of entertainment, similar to you.
How about you, Jaimie?
When I was growing up, and even now, the most appealing books to me have always been adventure books, and obviously stuff that relate to animals too. I always like anything that kind of seems to be a different idea than the normal day-to-day life, something where people are living differently than how I'm living, and just trying to experience through these books what it'd be like to not live the same day-to-day as I do in Naperville. One of my favorite ones I remember reading is called Sight, and it's about a wolf pack, but it puts like human voices into this pack. And I always found that very interesting, and you can kind of put yourself into that pact, and I loved it. I loved it.
Okay, thank you. Great. So my mother texted also late last night another question for us, which is interesting. So you may or may not have an answer for this one, but sometimes people like the Emersons enter your life just when you need them most. So the Emersons, my parents knew no one in Arkansas. They just moved there, and so somehow got connected to these neighbors who were really, several miles away on this dirt road mountain, Hoot Owl Mountain. And the Emersons really just took them on under their wings and showed them the ropes and helped them build a cabin, and they didn't know what they're doing. The Emersons did, but my parents didn't. So I'm just wondering if there were some people like that entered your life just when you needed them most. Gina?
So growing up wise, I can't think of anybody right offhand, but I'm sure because my life was so dysfunctional, there must have been people that came in to help out. But I would say now I can see much clearer where God has placed, especially I think females, sisters in Christ in my life. And even as people have moved away, they've been, I believe, divinely replaced to sort of help me through whatever was going on at the time, or what I needed, where I needed to grow spiritually or character-wise. So I'm sure that it's there. I just haven't been able to really clarify that yet.
Andrea?
As an adult, my mom passed away in 2006, and when we moved back to Chicagoland, we had spent some time in Hawaii being with her before she passed away, and then we moved back here. And I just was really missing her and missing a grandma for the kids. And God brought along this woman who is the aunt, or was the great aunt of my children's best friends. And she was just amazing. She kind of took on that role of mommying and grandmothering my kids and kind of filled that need for that time period. And then she ended up passing away, which is really, really awful way to end this. But that was just such a blessing at that particular time for her to walk in at that moment when we just needed somebody to love us.
Kathleen?
I can't think of a specific person in my life, but I know when my parents first moved here from Poland, it was a new country, new laws, just kind of a new atmosphere that they needed to get used to. So we had a lot of their friends who are now our family friends who kind of helped guide them. Like one little thing was, I remember when we first got our report cards when we came home, my mom really didn't know grades, because their grades in Poland are numerical, and here they're letters. So like little things like that, she would get kind of like help and hints from like outside friends.
How about you, Jaimie?
Well, when you asked this question, I had immediately one person came to my mind, and that's my roommate. Not that he's as random as like the Emersons were for you, where they just kind of came out of nowhere and helped you. I've known him for about 9 years. We've lived together for the past year and a half. He lived out here for a while, and we were friends, and he moved down to Florida, and he came back in January a couple years ago. We spent, the next few months and then through the summer spending a lot of time together, and he helped me through a lot of struggles, a lot of emotional things. And it just so happened I randomly needed a place to live in like a week's time. And he jumped right in. We got into a place together, and he has pretty much been my support system ever since. Anything emotional, financially, everything. We joke that we're this old married couple because he's my rock. He's my other side, so.
Oh, nice. That's cute.
Aww.
It is. So hopefully he knows, so he'll listen and find out. Okay. So the last question that I wanted to discuss for this podcast is about projects that you remember your parents tackling. So, my parents were pretty do-it-yourself kind of people. They tackled a new life, basically, from downtown Cleveland to Hoot Owl Mountain in Arkansas, and, built this cabin from scratch with no electricity and all kind of things like that. So I'm wondering if your parents had some big projects like that when you were younger. Gina?
So for me, I really could not come up with anything for this question. I would say living life on a daily basis was a pretty big project for my parents. They were pretty dysfunctional. I would say divorces, relationships, jobs, keeping a job, just functioning on a daily basis for both of them. Probably keeping me alive, maybe, was a goal and a project for them. But other than that, they were not really do-it-yourselfers. They were not, I don't think, creative type people. So,
Andrea?
Boy, did my parents tackle a big project. We lived on a portion of land, a large portion of land that my parents rented the house on, and my father would help take care of the orchard to help pay for the rent of the house. Some people moved in next to us on another large portion of land and had that land resurveyed, I think, and figured out that the corner of our house was just across the property line on their side. So they were all ready to charge us a huge amount of rent just for that tiny corner. And my dad said, no way. So all my uncles got together and the moms all came too, and it turned into a big house moving party. Literally, they jacked up the house and moved it over 10 feet. And then it was no longer across the property line. Why can't I say that word? And that was their big project. It worked. The house did not fall apart. It was still solid. And they didn't have to pay a huge amount of rent to this other person.
That's amazing.
I know.
That was in Hawaii.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. How about you, Kathleen?
So one of the big projects that my parents took on was when we bought that trailer in Wisconsin that I mentioned in the other podcast. We bought it almost 12 years ago, and they've been kind of renovating, kind of just building onto it since then. Even like just this past weekend, they were still out there kind of trying to turn it into like a log cabin. Oh, cool. And yeah, so my dad's a very do-it-yourselfer type of guy as well. He's in construction, so he likes to work with his hands. And it's not like a quick kind of turnaround. It's more of like a hobby for them. So they go up there every couple weekends and kind of work on it, expand it, and make it more homey for them.
So he's turning a mobile home into a log cabin?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, that's a big one.
That is a big one.
Yeah, he like built on like a living room to it, and now they've got like a porch, and there's kind of building around it. And
that's really cool.
Yeah, like took off, put siding on it. Now they want wood. It's a huge ordeal.
It's actually pretty common out in
Really?
Cove Creek, or where I grew up, but I've never heard of anyone like in the Midwest
Right.
turning a mobile home into something else.
Yeah. They've been working on it for a long time now.
Wow. Okay, how about you, Jaimie?
Well, as far as my parents go, my dad, not so much. We like to say he's the king of starting projects and never finishing. I can say one time, I remember he bought me a swing set for my birthday, bought all the wood, bought everything, and to this day has never set it up.
Oh, no.
So, king of starting projects. My mom, I can't say like any necessary big project she did, but like Gina, I feel like her life was just a project. My mom grew up very complicated. Her dad passed when she was 6 years old. My brother's 14 years older than me, so she had him very young at 19 and had to raise a child all alone by herself. She wasn't around any of the family, and then moved down here in the Midwest by herself, not knowing anybody. Eventually, somehow fell in love with my dad. They got married, they had me, and shortly after were divorced, and pretty much she did most of the actual raising of me. So this woman, raise two kids completely in separate times by herself, and that's a project, if you ask me. I don't think I could do that, and I always think that's amazing.
Well, thank you very much, as always, for being in the panel and for being so candid. Thanks for listening to the Hillbilly Justice on the School Bus podcast. Tune in next week when we solve the mystery of the missing tennis shoes. Until then, dream big and have fun.